Hi, I'm Scott Mendelson. Thank you for speaking with me. I'm a longtime film critic, box office pundit, and general film journalist slash analyst. I was I am thrilled to speak with all three of you regarding your Kids First uh, company, organization, whatever you want to call it. And first, if you don't mind, I'd like you to take turns to saying, who are you? What do you want? And what are some of your favorite movies?
Hi, my name is Hanadi, and some of my favorite movies are Mean Girls. I like Home. Let me see, what else do I like? I like scary movies a lot, and let's see, let me think of one more. Oh, and I love Lilo and Stitch.
I am one of the few people that didn't like that movie, not because it was bad, but because the entire time I felt so bad for the two of them and the trouble that Stitch was causing that I just wanted him to leave them the heck alone. And I know that's insane. Trust me, I know that's nuts. But anyway, um, Mr. Manny, I believe, and please forgive me, I'm terrible with names. Would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Ishan Mani. I am a Kids First film critic. My favorite movie, that's a tough choice. It's like picking your favorite child. I think my favorite, I'll say genres are either, a really solidly, properly packed like action film or biopics. So one of my favorites is Roadrunner, which is a biopic of Anthony Bourdain. And I think I'm on like my 15th rewatch of the original Top Gun movie. So that's got to be like all time in terms of action, one of my favorites.
Fair enough. You must have been thrilled a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah.
36 years later, we get a sequel, and it's pretty good,
Oh
shockingly
yeah.
enough. Anyway, last but not least, I don't see your last name there, so I'll just say Miss S. I apologize.
Hi, I'm Sydney. I'm a kids first film critic as well. And some of my favorite movies are any of the Avatar movies or Spider-Man movies. I really like those. And my favorite Disney movie is Moana. So I'm also excited that Moana 2 is coming out.
Oh, right. Yeah, they just announced that. It started as a Disney Plus episodic that they retrofitted into a movie, so
Yeah.
hopefully it's closer in quality to Toy Story 2 than Planes, Fire, and Rescue. But we'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll see where they take it.
um And so I guess this is a very generic question, but how did you get into this and why? You can answer in whatever order you want.
Okay, I'll go first. I got into Kids First because, well, I was an actor initially, and I really wanted to get more education about like behind the scenes, and that's when I discovered Kids First or Miss Randy's organization, and I got in, and I got in just because I wanted to learn more about the other side of the camera and journalism.
Fair enough.
That's cool. I joined because I also was an actor and I'm a dancer. So I really like performing arts, but I also like speaking in front of people. I like giving speeches and stuff. So when I heard about this, I was like, I'm not camera shy. I think I should give it a shot. And then my mom's friend's daughter's in it too. And she gave us the idea and I was like, oh, that sounds awesome. I should give it a try. And that's how I came
And you've been regretting it ever since.
here.
And I'll go last. So actually, I was already into journalism by the time that I came across Kids First. But I was more on the political side or like some of the hard news, the boring stuff, I guess. And I've always loved movies. So I'm Indian American. So for me, Bollywood was a great way to connect to my culture growing up. I also had a smattering of Hollywood movies that I used to love to watch. And so I was really looking for an outlet to turn that sort of movie watching hobby. It was like my parents were like, you're watching movies for 7 hours straight. This is kind of concerning at this point. So how do we make this productive? And then I came across Kids First. And Kids First was, I think, and it to this date has been my favorite sort of extracurricular or my favorite involvement, just because I'm able to do the thing I love the most and also share my thoughts on all those different things. And people will listen and people will interact with it. They will share their thoughts in response to my reviews, my interviews. So yeah, it's an amazing organization.
Fair enough. If I may ask a follow up, I'll be honest, the extent to which I know much about Indian cinema is mostly about the over-the-top action films that I've been trying to keep up with, just because I miss when Hollywood used to make those, when they, more, not necessarily automatically fantastic. Mission Impossible
Yeah.
2, which is John Woo's picture, which seems like to be like the inspiration point for the last 20 years of Hollywood, Bollywood, and Hollywood action cinema, but whatever. Do you have a favorite in that subgenre?
With an action. Oh gosh. Well, the name on everyone's lips for the past 2 years or year and a half or whatever has been RRR. It's all over Netflix. It's they got an Oscars nod for the blockbuster song Natu Natu. I mean, the film was shot beautifully. I'm actually a bit of a Bollywood nostalgic. I like how some of the films in the 90s were made. Because you kind of got that really nice, cheesy, sort of classic Bollywood romance line and all that kind of stuff going on too. Nice, music. The songs were shot in like Switzerland. They're like beautiful outfits, incredible production quality. But of course now as the scene is kind of diversifying, you're getting more independent creators. You're getting folks who are looking at Hollywood, looking at even European cinema, looking at places like A24, and are like, how can we emulate this in our country for our population, for our tastes? And that's also really, really interesting and cool.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's. I mean, you all know this probably, but for the last 10 years, you had Hollywood sort of working with China to try to boost the grosses of their own movies. Meanwhile, China was very quickly learning how to make their own tentpoles.
Oh yeah.
And at least in the 2020s, they're like, we don't need you guys anymore. Come home. We've got our own cool stuff. Um, but and again, that was just something that I sort of paid attention to just as a box office nerd. And I tried to see some of them, the big, the Wolf Warrior 2s and the Moon Man and
Right.
whatever, the ones that were breaking out big in China that were, and some of them were like, okay, if Godzilla minus one can do 50 million bucks, surely Moon Man can do like 20. I mean, that's whatever. In the times that you've been doing this, and you might not even have an opinion on this, so kind of throwing this out there. What do you feel has sort of been the biggest change, either in terms of the movies that you like or the way the entertainment industry has changed around you? I know that's a really weird question, but I'm curious because you've been living in a time of just immediate, you've lived through an entire history of life in the last 5-6 years, just in the entertainment industry. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of the way the industry has evolved in your eyes, if that makes any sense. If not, I apologize.
Well, when I was a kid, I would just watch movies and that was it. But now I actually edit like my thoughts about it and I just see movies differently. Like I don't see it plainly as a storyline. I see it as, oh, how did they create this or how does this impact other people? And I think it's also helped me view life in a different way, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I just see them differently now and they have secret messages that I can unfold. And it's just honestly really cool because like you said, 5 or 6 years ago, I did not comprehend that type of stuff. So it's honestly just really cool to see how we can interpret it, especially as kids, um, and how people react to that.
Fair enough. Um, to those of you who have peers that are interested in mainstream entertainment, to the extent that even exists anymore, what are your friends like in terms of what's mainstream popular these days? I mean, I know what was popular in the 2010s, and I'm wondering, is that still a big deal? I mean, and I'm going to ask a very leading question here. Is part of the problem that Disney's been having since the last 4 years just that the next generation of kids just doesn't care as much about Disney product, whether it's the superhero movies or the live action remakes or the animated films, as people in the 2000s and 2010s did? Miss Keys, if you have any thoughts.
Definitely something that I've noticed about my friends is that they watch some TV, but it's not as much as like YouTube or like TikToks anymore. So I definitely noticed that like an increase in social media has definitely affected like how much they watch like other streaming services or old movies or other TV shows.
Yeah, I mean, my kids, and I'm sure this is representative of a lot of people that fell they won't watch movies, but they'll watch certain YouTube personalities spend an hour dissecting the movie, often in a very snarky way. And I try not to be too judgmental about that, but it's like, at least watch the movie first and then watch the people, making fun of it. But whatever.
Mhm.
I'm just an old man who's dying out. Let's see. What were I guess the movies of the last few years where that you felt that even people that weren't normally into cinema, even they had to run out and see? Were there any big films that like everyone saw, even people that weren't necessarily in the film nerd bubble like we are? Miss S?
I would say Oppenheimer and Barbie. So those hit social media, and if you look at how much Barbie earned in ticket sales, it was a lot. Like I know a lot of people don't go to the theaters and stuff, but they sold out like crazy amount, and it was all over the internet. So I think that weekend was really important for the film industry.
In your experiences, did you ask talk, and this is for anyone, what was it about a 3 hour action light R-rated atomic bomb drama that was apparently huge with the kids? Because that was a very happy surprise last year. Generally speaking, in my findings, running time doesn't matter if it's a movie you can bring your kids to. But theoretically, Oppenheimer was something that you would not bring your children to, both because it's an R-rated movie, because it's not filled with action. It's not Inception. But obviously I was very wrong. So I'm wondering, did you talk to any either your peers or just people in your ecosystem? Like, what was it about this film that made them interested?
I can jump in on this one to begin. I think that, well, the whole Barbenheimer phenomenon of the two releasing in the same window, marketing being completely on point for both of them. I mean, you had Cillian Murphy and you had the whole team for Oppenheimer out and about. You had the whole team for Barbie out and about. I think the intersection of good PR and, I mean, a Nolan film is going to be good cinema. I mean, there's a sort of bar for that. When those two things intersect, I think that even people who are not your traditional cinema goers, theater goers, will kind of come out of the woodwork and watch. The other component, I think, at least this was why I think my parents were like, you should go see Oppenheimer, is somewhat the sort of historical value of it. I mean, I'm a documentary nerd, so I'm going to say it this way, that it's a great sort of somewhat fun, but also, or like it has gravitas, of course, and it is a serious film, but it's a decent picturization of sort of the events that happened at a very pivotal time in history. And so if you're interested in that, you'd go out for that. I mean, also incredible graphics, incredible production quality. It had the sort of, I mean, not to use again buzzwords, but it had the sort of thing that many like IP based films like your Avengers or Marvel, all those kind of things have, but it's a true story. It has in its live action, all that good stuff. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I was coming from when I was thinking about why folks went out to see it.
No, and that's I that is a yes. I mean that makes sense, and I like what you said about it being fun because The Dark Knight comes out in 2008, makes $1 billion, changes cinema forever, and then you have like a decade of Hollywood trying to copy the Chris Nolan model, thinking that that means it's all dark and serious and gravitas. Like, yeah, but they're also fun, entertaining, propulsive pictures. And like the only Dark Knight ripoff I would argue that got that was Skyfall, which is
Yeah.
ironic since obviously no one loves the Bond films. Um, this is okay. I'll throw you more of a softball, whatever. What are your favorite things about writing reviews? What makes you happiest when you're doing the writing, if that makes sense? Miss S, please.
I honestly just like talking. I like talking to people and especially like sharing my opinion. Like I'm very strong-willed on my opinion. So if I can share my opinion with the world and recommend them movies and then they actually have fun watching it, like you said, that's the most important part at the end of the day. Like we're creating a good influence on other people and just knowing that makes me happy.
You want to take turns in naming a movie that everyone else liked, but you would argue is terrible, and why? Or you know what? I'll make it more fun for you. A movie that everybody hates that you think is great, because that's actually more fun. Or not great, but you enjoy it, like guilty pleasure, if you want to call it that. Wild Wild West. Terrible film, but Will Smith is fun. Kevin Kline is funny. Kenneth Branagh's having a blast. The money's on the screen. Yada yada yada. And frankly, it's late '90s. It's one of the few. Frankly, it's one of the few blockbusters then, and especially after 9/11, when I would argue you started seeing a sort of a homogenization of the tentpole that actually was very upfront about, yes, this bad guy is a racist, and the racism is why he's an evil he's an evil person. Sorry, I was about to use a naughty word. And I think, in the 2000s through the 2010s, I think Hollywood lost some of that in terms of just encasing all that stuff in like metaphor, fantastical metaphor. The X-Men's a parable for this. The Hunger Games are a parable for that. And they're trying to get that back a little bit, but it's going to take a while. We lost a lot of ground. But anyway, I'm mumbling. Does anyone have a movie that they love that everyone else doesn't? Well, that's no fun. Do you have any questions for me? Because I've been babbling way too much.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, there's time for both.
Yeah, you go ahead.
You can go first. Oh, okay. So, I researched you a little bit, and I found something called Mendelssohn's Memos. So, can you tell us something about that?
Firstly, check your computer for viruses. I've not been on that site in 11 years. I have no idea. No, I'm sure it's fine. It's a blog spot that I started in 2008. It was basically my first regular thing that I did it as a hobby. My first daughter had just been born, and it was something that I could do that didn't necessarily require me to leave home at any given time. And this was, I would occasionally do press screenings, and so I wrote, and it was a blog. I mean, it wasn't anything fancier than that. I did it a lot. Movie reviews, film news, commentary, box office analysis. I was always interested in the box office just from a scholarly / financial point of view from when I was, 10 years old and finding the Monday edition of USA Today. That is a newspaper that I think is out of service, as most newspapers sadly are these days. And they would have the top 10 box office for the weekend. And then when I was a little older, I subscribed to Entertainment Weekly, another magazine that no longer exists. Boy, you're all so lucky. And so I was always very interested in the box office, what films made, why they made it. And it became sort of a statistical junkie in that sense. And my father always encouraged that because he was a baseball statistical junkie. So it was just tomato. Mendelssohn's Memos, I did that on my own for 5 years, just as a hobby, thinking it wouldn't actually be a job. And then in April 2013, I got recruited by Forbes.com to be one of their contributors, thinking I can, pay off some bills, pay down some debts. I was working as a paralegal then. And by the second month, I realized that I was good enough at it in terms of the compensation for traffic shenanigans they had set up that it could be my job. And the cruel irony is I couldn't quit my day job for the first year and a half because we were trying to buy a house. So for the first year and a half, I was doing both. And then in September 2014, we bought the house. I was able to walk away from the day job. And I've been doing this in one capacity or another ever since. So yes, Mendelssohn's Memos is basically raw, unfiltered, full of stuff that I would not write today, just because for one reason or another. Not in the sense it was toxic or anyway. I was always, I'm too empathetic to do that. I'm scared of hurting people's feelings. And then what I've been trying to do now in my Substack is sort of get back to that somewhat more off the cuff observational content, as opposed to the more strict journalistic stuff that I was doing at Forbes and at the Wrap.
That's cool. It's kind of like your hobby turned into your job. So that's cool if you're passionate about it.
The one warning I will, and I say this jokingly, but I mean this. The one bad thing about if you figure out a way to do the thing you love as your job, then the thing you love becomes your job. And, it's still a net positive, but there are some days that I miss just going to the movies for fun, where it really doesn't matter how I have to, do I have to write about this? Do I have to think of, is there a think piece I have to consider, et cetera, et cetera. But that's my problem. That won't necessarily be yours. I apologize. Your question, Mr. Manny?
Well, I was thinking of doing something actually. Why don't we? I'll start with you, Mr. Mendelsohn.
Ooh.
What do you think are three things that make both a commercially viable and cinematically good film? Like, there can be these great blockbusters that are objectively not good cinema, but then there are, those select few, godly films that are superb in terms of cinematography, superb in terms of production, in terms of execution, and they also have a super box office run. What do you think, since you're also a statistical junkie, what are the ingredients that go into making that kind of a production? Maybe we can compare to see if that is kind of what we've noticed.
Fair enough. I would argue in the last 10 years, a big sea change has been in the proverbial olden days, and I'm just talking like up until maybe the mid 2010s, early 2010s, let's be realistic, where people would still go to the movies because an actor or an actress they liked was in it. And so it wasn't that people craved original storytelling and fresh new characters. It's that when Will Smith in a fun concept was enough to get people in the theaters, then Hitch, which is basically come watch Will Smith play a non-toxic pickup artist who falls in love and fumbles while trying to follow his own advice, that was enough to make Hitch a blockbuster unto itself. The difference between, say, Luc Besson's The Fifth Element in 1997 and Luc Besson's Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets in 2017 is that in 1997, the idea of Bruce Willis in a spectacularly huge mega-budget sci-fi fantasy was enough to make that film a commercial hit. While in 2017, we really don't have a lot of new movie stars. So, Dane Villain and, God help me, I don't even remember her name offhand. The young woman that was in Suicide Squad as well. She was in Only Murders in the Building. She's. But anyway, that's sort of my point, is they are what I like to call butts in seats draws. In terms of what movie stars are still butts in seats movie stars, I would argue Leonardo DiCaprio, because people will still show up just because it's a Leo picture. Sandra Bullock, who is still putting out solid commercial hits in a variety of genres without a lot of IP in there. And assuming the budget is reasonable, Denzel Washington, and weirdly enough, Gerard Butler, who makes these lower budget grindhouse action pictures. But if you make a movie where a $10 to $15 million opening is big enough, he's a movie star. Everyone else, I would argue, has an asterisk. Obviously, Hugh Jackman is huge when he's Wolverine. Chris Hemsworth is huge when he's Thor. Tom Cruise is huge when he's Ethan Hunt, and apparently when he's Pete Mitchell as well. I didn't see that coming. Because the film kept getting delayed for 2 years, I have 2 years of Forbes articles explaining why Top Gun will probably be okay, but hold on a second. There's a ceiling on non-Mission Impossible Tom Cruise films, and it's about 400 million. So let's cool our jets here. That film made $1.4 billion without China, by the way. So, whoops. The short version of that, and I'm terrible at giving the short version of these things, you need a franchise, IP, with a marquee character. That, to me, is the difference between, people didn't just show up for the Hunger Games because it was Hunger Games in the abstract. It was they liked Bella Swan, as played by Jennifer Lawrence. They liked Peeta and General Snow and the other guy that ends up being a bad guy, sort of, kind of, who's played by one of the Hemsworth brothers that I don't care about. Apologies if you were team the other guy. Gabe, I think, whatever. And people went to Twilight because they liked Bella and Jacob and Edward, hashtag Team Edward. Not because in the abstract they liked that genre. That's why after Twilight, you saw a lot of YA fantasy romance books being made into movies, some of which were quite good. I quite like Beautiful Creatures. That is one of my official recommendations, because it's possible you didn't see it because nobody saw it. But I also couldn't name those characters off the top of my head, which I think is a big difference. It's the difference between a Hunger Games and a Divergent, between a Harry Potter and the Spiderwick Chronicles. Again, quality notwithstanding, Spiderwick is very good. Dark is Rising is not. But marquee characters I've found over the last several years is the biggest motivator for what will get people in the theater. Now, stereotypically speaking, that's a superhero. Deadpool, Black Panther, Venom, Joker. Sometimes that's like a real life person, like Freddie Mercury, or apparently Oppenheimer. Who knew? Or Barbie. Obviously, that's not a real person, but it's not just a superhero. And movie stars help, but Angelina Jolie as Maleficent is a big deal, because that's it's an actor people know, like a character that's kind of a fun approximation of their on-screen or off-screen persona. She's known as this towering goddess who's playing this very towering, dominating Disney villain. I mean, if they ever did, God forbid, do the Avengers with Disney princess characters, Maleficent would be the big bad. I mean, there's almost no doubt about that. Maleficent would be cool and do Frollo, but whatever. I'm the only one that likes Hunchback. But anyway, so Angelina Jolie as Maleficent is a bigger deal than just an Angelina Jolie movie or just some no-name actress playing Maleficent. So in a nutshell, stars we know as characters we want to see on screen, theoretically in some kind of property that we enjoy. So why did Five Nights at Freddy's break out late last year? First of all, it was, God forbid, a new franchise based on a relatively new property aimed at people your age, not me. And God, I loved that. I loved that I was sitting there watching that movie. And yes, I would argue yes. Oh, I thought I heard a ding. I apologize. And I loved watching the movie that I arguably thought was terrible, but my children were enjoying it because it was something that they knew and they liked, references that they got. And again, you had the marquee characters of Freddy Fazbear and the other ones who I don't know offhand, but my children could tell you, and that matters. And okay, I've been talking way too much. I apologize.
I definitely, I think those points are all totally valid. I think especially with like the rise of IP films, IP based films, I guess, when you have these established properties. I mean, it's funny when you think back, like the Maltese Falcon, the Wizard of Oz, the Godfather, they're all technically based on novels, aka IP. But they're also some of the high points of movies as an art form. I think it's just they were made beautifully, the performances are great, etc. I think that it's been baked into movies for generations to have this kind of IP focus almost, or like whenever you have an IP property, it's nice when you have a brand people already know because audiences like familiarity. It's also why like you don't see the general American public going into like French cinema or Japanese cinema and or like I mean now there are more Murakami readers, but like 20 years ago there were not that many Murakami readers in the continental US. I mean, but definitely the chokehold that IP has over moneymakers in cinema, over production houses in cinema. It's working for a variety of reasons. But do you think it's a good thing?
Well, I think overall, it's not a good thing because of just how it's changed. In the proverbial olden days, yes, there were always going to be films that were based on books or comic books or video games where the hook was come see a movie version of this property that you know and like. And isn't it neat? We turned this into a movie. I would argue Tim Burton's Batman 35 years ago was the one who sort of started that in a modern sense. But I think now it's become so much to where you actually need that pre-sold familiarity to get people to show up at all. And something like, relatively speaking, Maltese Falcon and Wizard of Oz, even to a certain extent, Jaws or The Godfather, yes, people had read the book, but to a certain extent, those were what I like to call new to you adaptations. And a recent example of that is The Black Phone, which is a horror film from Blumhouse. Yes, it's based on a short story by Stephen King's son, but neither myself nor I imagine most of the people going to the theater had read the book. So for them, it was an original. Coming next month, the Emily Blunt Ryan Gosling picture, The Fall Guy, which is a lot of fun, by the way. I heartily recommend that. It's technically based on a 1980s TV show, but to most people in the audience, it's an original concept. Or, The Equalizer. Yes, those films are based on an old CBS TV show, but most of the appeal is come see Denzel Washington as righteous Revenger Man. And that is a hook. I mean, when he's playing, a righteous butt kicker who just dispenses horrific retaliatory righteous violence, that's one of the safest bets in Hollywood. But I guess I'll throw this one to Miss Keys, if that's all right. How do you think, for you, how do you think AI has affected or will affect mainstream cinema in the next few years?
Ooh, that's a good question. I definitely think that one, I've seen a lot of AI recreation of things. Like I've used AI and I've like asked it to like tell me, give me a script or give me prompts for like different TV shows that I like. And I noticed that it'll type like very accurate scripts, which is honestly terrifying. Or I've heard like AI recreation voices of like animation shows. Like I've seen like a Peppa Pig like episode recreation. So I can't really tell if it's gonna affect it negatively or positively, but I think it'll be a mix of both. I think one that some people might use it in the wrong way, and I think others will use it in a way to like cultivate more ideas and use it to get like more fresh ideas and more fresh shows and juices going.
Fair enough. Do you have any thoughts, Miss S?
Yeah, so actually with the AI, I saw actors that like the AI created the actors, but it looked exactly like them. And they were saying stuff like, oh, we have a new movie coming out, and it was completely fake. So that's kind of scary that they could like pretend to be them, and then it kind of gets the internet all riled up. But honestly, AI is getting really scary. And I'm not sure how it's going to affect the film industry, but with the actors' impersonations, that's definitely like, I feel like that's going to get out of hand.
I mean, I wonder, and again, I don't know because we're all in very uncharted territory here. I know it will affect culture in many, many bad ways just because it'll be used to, for politics, fake ads, fake incriminating video, other things that I probably can't discuss with children, but all very bad. Uh, how it will impact legit sanctioned mainstream art, I'm frankly less sure. I will say, ironically, I was very heartened that Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and The Flash both bombed last summer because I could have very easily seen a situation where AI would be used to let's make a James Bond film starring 35-year-old Sean Connery. And if there's an audience for that kind of nostalgia, there you go. Or let's remake Solo, a Star Wars story, but with Harrison Ford this time. And I shudder to think that there would be enough of a marketplace for that. And I'm hopeful that the fact that those two specific films, which were absolutely banking on, grandpa nostalgia, although, oh, come on. I grew up with the Burton Keaton Batman films. They're two of my favorite films growing up. It was 30 years ago. I moved on. Why can't you move on? Not you. I'm talking to people much, my age. I just, and this is just, a difference of opinion, I guess, but I don't get people that are as excited for like the eighth Spider-Man movie as I was 20 years ago for the first Spider-Man movie. But whatever. I apologize, Mr. Manny. I didn't get your thoughts on AI yet.
No, yeah. I think there's definitely somewhat of a fear that, it can be misused. I mean, there's a new, what's it called, Sora that OpenAI is coming up with, which can essentially just generate frames. How good the video quality is up for debate. I still think that there are ways to practically apply AI with decent sort of guardrails. I mean, even in editing, like with films that are CGI based, computer generated, graphics are in a lot of action films and a lot of films set in alternate realities, alternate worlds, stuff like that. I think that it could certainly be helpful when it comes to, I mean, like generative reduction of like, oh, there's a lamp here, let's take this out and let's replace it with something else. Or any of those kind of, I mean, even like dubbing could be, I mean, if it's honed properly and if it doesn't sound like, some Star Wars robot dubbing things over, it could be really helpful. I also think that we could even see uh almost more efficient or like faster sort of timelines for film production if it's used properly. I mean, again, not to bring up Bollywood one more time, but it's Bollywood as a film industry versus Hollywood. This is true for a lot of overseas film industries. It operates almost on a sort of musical theater model or a sort of a theater production model where like you have your cast, they shoot whatever. The outdoor is 30 days, 60 days, whatever. They'll edit it, stuff like that, and it's out the door within 9 to 13 months. In the US, Hollywood has always been, you get bang for your buck for sure, but you also that means it takes what, 3 years, sometimes more, sometimes less, to produce an Oppenheimer. That was probably many more years than that, to produce a Barbie, to produce any of these films. I mean, even if you go 20 years ago, any of those films, it took more time. So incorporating tech, because of its speed, removes barriers for a lot of the creative skill and things like that. I mean, I can see that there's a lot of collaboration possible. There's a lot of increased efficiency that's possible if you were to integrate AI. Plus, you'd be able to make CGI look better than it did in that Ant-Man film. I think it was Ant-Man Quantumania. But I digress.
And Ant-Man and the Wasp, the second one, is one of my favorite MCU Part 2 sequels. Ant-Man, Quantumania may be their worst movie. And I was old enough to see The Incredible Hulk in theaters.
Yeah.
Sorry, well, you disagree. Which is your least or whatever? Oh, sorry. I apologize. I thought you said something, Sydney.
Oh no, I agree. Like the CGI was not impressive in that movie.
I will agree with you, but I do think that the special effects were sort of a whipping boy for the sort of the sort of the go-to discourse for just the film not working. I mean, I didn't think the special effects in the Marvels were that bad, or Love and Thunder were that bad. It's just the films had other issues.
Yeah.
But I still think, unfortunately, and this is my own pet peeve, but I'm very annoyed the extent to which Marvel waited until like almost the end of the superhero boom before they really started diversifying their movies. They basically kept going, to paraphrase the first Iron Man, next time, baby, next time, baby. And then you get right before the end, you get Captain Marvel and Black Panther, and superhero boom's over. Sorry. Now no one's actually going to show up to these movies. And all that did was give ammunition to the go woke, go broke YouTube troll industrial complex. And which is now a self-fulfilling cycle of schmuckery. I think I can use that word. It's Yiddish, I think. Let me see. What tentpoles have you seen lately that you actually enjoyed? It was right. It's blockbusters. Tentpole is an old school word. It basically means this one surefire hit film is going to make so much money, it's going to hold the studio up through the year and make up for a roll of the dice that doesn't work. So this is hard because the studios aren't run like this anymore. But Civil War for A24 is going to be a big enough of a hit that it will allow them to roll the dice on a Maxine, for example. But anyway, recent blockbusters, which ones worked for you, if I may ask, and all three of you?
If you would consider this a blockbuster, I mean, I didn't research how much
Don't
how
worry
many
about
views it got, but one of the recent movies I've seen was Dune Part 2, and I was honestly really impressed.
That's the biggest grossing movie of the year. It counts.
Okay. I watched it like a couple months ago and stuff, so I wasn't sure how much it shot up and how many people watched it, but I honestly really liked it. I didn't mind that it was that long because it was so engaging. And the special effects were amazing. in my opinion. And honestly, I was just like really impressed because a lot of the movies, like a lot of the consecutive Marvel movies, for example, like you mentioned, they're pretty similar. Like Dune Part One, um, how do I explain this? Dune Part One and Dune Part Two, I feel like they had similarities, but adding on to the plot, so we were still engaged into it. And that's like a pet peeve of mine that if if they're so similar, I don't want to see the same movie twice, basically. Like I understand that people are fans of the superheroes and they dress up in Comic-Con for it and they go all out, but it's not that interesting if it's the same superhero doing the same exact thing in a different setting.
If I may, oh, sorry, I do want to ask a follow up, but I'll get your favorite recent tentpole, Hollywood or otherwise. I'm sorry, you can't say what I'm pointing, Mr. Manny.
Oh,
Sorry.
well, to kind of follow in that trend, I think that one I really enjoyed was a film that I actually had zero clue about until somebody told me you have to go watch this is The Holdovers. I don't know how
Oh yeah.
the news never reached me, but I only heard about it maybe 3 weeks prior to the Academy Awards. So I said, okay, you know what, may as well watch it since they're winning. I mean, they're nominated for all these things. Paul Giamatti, superb, entire film shot just incredible. The writing was great. I'm somebody also who like if the writing is a little too terse or if the writing is a little too well, let's say voluminous, I'll kind of, tune out or I'll be like, "Oh, God, like because we all come from the sort of TikTok generation. It's like the figure that's now being quoted is it takes us maybe what 10 seconds, 20 seconds to figure out if we really enjoy something or not, and then we'll just swipe. We'll just move on, right? And so for a film to have the quality of being able to grip you, which I think The Holdovers I wasn't expecting it to, but it really did, is really commendable, especially in this time, and to get a diverse audience all hooked on it, to garner such wide appeal and such widespread praise, is really impressive. So yeah, The Holdovers has got to be my recent favorite.
Fair enough. Miss Keys?
So can I do like a streaming service, like a TV show? Because I personally haven't seen like a lot of like movies recently.
Sure.
Um, One temple or blockbuster show that I've seen recently has been Percy Jackson, the TV
Oh,
show.
that's
That
the
was like
one my
a
son
very
actually watched.
yeah, that was a very big thing, especially because it had such a loyal like fan base. So like you had millions of like adults and new children watching like this show, and it had like a bunch of views. And I heard that it made a lot because it's making season 2 now. So that would
Mhm.
be something I would say that was a really big temple that I saw.
Yeah, and that was an example of what we've seen a lot, which is that these youth skewing properties where they tried to make movies right after Harry Potter, the movies weren't good or they just didn't connect, and so they're like trying again in the streaming ecosystem. The Avatar, the new Avatar show, Percy Jackson. I think there's another Spider-Man Chronicles on the way or something, which I have mixed feelings about that because again, yes, they're intended for kids of all ages, and my 8-year-old thought it was nifty, but on the other hand, like the cranky old man in me saying these were properties that were popular 20 years ago, this is better, make another Five Nights at Freddy but good. um but I did want to ask in terms of the Marvel stuff, just because that discourse is just so dominated throughout the 2010s. Were either of you, any of you, ever into the MCU and then you sort of dropped off after Endgame, or was it something that you were never all that into, or what were your thoughts of the MCU as it was happening? Miss S.
I can go first. So me and my family watched all of the movies together, and honestly, I mean I understood the hype and stuff, but I never really got into the huge like core fan base of Marvel. I've always been a Spider-Man girl. So when Marvel and Spider-Man collided, I was kind of like, whoa, that's interesting because that's not how it was before. But it's interesting, and I want to see what they have to do in the future with Marvel. if they come up with new ideas, because like I said, it's kind of consecutive and similar. But yeah, honestly, I feel like everyone has had a connection to Marvel in some way. They grew up watching it, or they are related to, they watched it with their family, like I did. So I'm honestly kind of neutral on this because there are pros and cons to watching it, in my opinion. Like, I feel like it's great to watch once, but honestly, I don't think you need to watch all of the movies multiple times.
Fair enough. Yeah, when I was a kid, there were certainly movies that I watched multiple times, but I also like watching stuff that I hadn't seen before.
Hmm.
And I do think, to be fair, I think part of that is just in a generational sense. I didn't have the options that you have. I mean, we talk about you something you, Mr. Manny, mentioned a few minutes ago about, you need 10 seconds to decide whether or not you care. On one hand, you can go, oh, wow, 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 kids can't pay attention. But it's like, if I had those options, I might not be, I feel that the older generation always comes down on the younger generation for how they spend their free time without realizing that if they had those options when they were a kid, they wouldn't have been outside playing stickball. If I had, social media and TikTok and YouTube, that's probably how I would have spent my free time. So I guess another question, if I may, is, and this goes to all three of you, with all of these options competing for your entertainment time and dollar, what is it about movies that still hooks you in a time where I would argue mainstream theatrical cinema isn't nearly as dominating a pop culture force as it was in my proverbial day? So why still choose movies?
I can jump in on this to get us
Please.
started. And I'll just kind of keep it to theatrical cinema because we're all like suspended somewhere between Netflix, Hulu, and in-person theaters. But I'll start by saying I love movie theaters. I think it's the one thing that got me through the college process is watching a movie in theaters with my family, every week, every other week, in our local AMC. It's a sort of experience that I think is undervalued today. It used to be a huge thing. I mean, even when I was in elementary school, all of my birthdays were like, let's go to the movies. Actually, now that I think about it, it makes sense. I've become an entertainment, reporter. But we used to really cherish that and prioritize that because especially when you're seeing it in a theater, you feel like you're almost transported. I mean, to quote what is it, the AMC commercial, right? You're transported to a different world. Things really that seem impossible come true. There's that whole magic of the cinema, which now, I mean, it's been phone or my iPad or whatever, and look up Netflix and find any, array of some, 700 shows, 700, films, whatever, and I can like switch between them. It's not as, I don't want to say exclusive, but it's not as like special anymore. I think to convince people that they need the experience of a theater, and they need the experience of cinema as opposed to like, watching a movie like you would watch a TikTok is, I think, really key. Uh, Theaters, I think, still need the sort of modernization and like to kind of clean up a little bit. Need to be a little bit less of the relics of the past. Need to kind of channel more of the aura of the place and time they live in, and where their audiences are. I mean, this is really extending it a bit too far, but using the lobby of a theater better, making it really a place for people to like. It should be a place of community, I think, and this is just for theater going cinema to really bring people out of their dens where they're watching, Netflix or Prime Video or whatever, and make them say, "Here, let's have a family outing and let's go to the theater and let's catch." Even if it's the next Marvel movie, God forbid, or if it's, any one of the other, 15 blockbusters that are going to show up, in the next year and a half. That should be our goal. That should be what we're priming for.
Fair enough. Any thoughts, Miss Keys, on that? Why movies?
Um, yes. One thing about movies that like continue makes me going or something like that was I would say is social media because if a new movie comes out and you go on TikTok and all you see is short clips from the movies or people editing the movies or people saying like this movie was incredible, especially when it's like your peers, like you're going to want to go see it eventually, like after you spend the whole week scrolling about it, you're like, okay, so something must be good about this film.
So
Right, I agree. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I think that's actually kind of encouraging that
Mhm.
TikTok, which is often held up as sort of the enemy of pop culture and the enemy of cinema, is doing at least some good in terms of creating awareness and interest in films among the stereotypical TikTok generation. And yeah, we've seen that here and there, and the studios are certainly trying to use that to their advantage because, I mean, I don't want to get you didn't come here to listen to me lecture, but it's a lot harder to raise awareness and interest than it used to be. We're more of a monoculture.
Mhm.
Anyway, you were saying, I apologize, Miss S. Sydney.
Oh yeah, so I agree with both of them because trends come and go, but at the end of the day, when I ask my friends to go out, we go to the movies and we have a great time, and that's honestly the most important thing. Movies are made to keep us entertained, to make us have fun, and I think um as a critic, sometimes we forget that that's what it's there for. It's there for pleasure. It's not to critique it so much to the point where you're like, I no one should see this movie because at the end of the day, like we're all trying to have fun, we're all trying to be happy. And I think as a critic, I want to make a positive impact on people and recommend them movies that they would have fun watching.
Fair enough. Um, and yeah, I know we've been slagging on the MCU a little bit, but honestly, for the first 10 years, I mean, I didn't like every single one of them, but they did have a certain bar of, and that's one reason they were so dominant in the 2010s, that at least in terms of tempos, they provided at least a certain level of polished character, character driven star act 3-star quality. And when the competition is King Arthur and the Legend of the Sword or Warcraft, I can see why Marvel wins. All due respect. Um,
Mhm.
but sorry if you're one of the people that like Warcraft. I do know some of those people. I don't begrudge. Um, and no, done well. I think tentpoles can be of it's. I think Black Panther is one of Disney's better movies. I think The Last Jedi was terrific. Even recently, I think Shang-Chi is probably Disney's best live action movie in a generation. And whether or not you want to comp Lion King as live action, that's a different conversation. Avatar. I mean, the internet, and I was guilty of this a decade ago, of saying, it's interesting the way Avatar made all that money and now nobody talks about it. But sure enough, 14 years later, they all show up again. As for me, my forgive me if this is inappropriate, but my come to Jesus moment was when I went to Disney World in 2018 and saw the Land of Pandora and saw how well that was working with kids that had never even heard of Avatar. I was like, oh yeah, the sequel's gonna be fine. My kids bought a Banshee, and when we came back home, we watched Avatar on my giant 2D TV, and they loved it. So it's like, yeah, that'll be fun. But is there something you want to talk about in terms of the difference between watching a film as a critic versus watching it as a consumer? Because there is a certain push pull, especially in online discourse. Like, critics hate movies, they hate fun. It's like, first of all, I've never met anyone that got into this business at any level because they hated movies. So at some level, you actually have to like movies to do this. Anyway, Miss Keys, looked like you were about to say something.
Oh, I was going to say, I think a key difference I noticed between watching as like a consumer and a critic is that like I pay attention to like the smallest details when I watch it. Like I'm like, oh wait, she did that, or like, oh, this CGI was good, or I really like the setting here. So I definitely like watching it like an extra eye and I catch like all minor details versus when I'm watching it just like for fun. I'm like just kind of more focusing on like the storyline rather than like stuff I'm gonna write about later.
Fair enough. Sydney, if you have any thoughts.
For sure, I would say that as well. And also, when I'm critiquing, I honestly appreciate like the behind the scenes people because when we're watching it, we honestly just think about who's on the screen and not who's behind it. So I really appreciate the behind the scenes people while I'm watching it because a lot of work and effort um was made to make the movies.
Yeah, and the best piece of advice I can give any film person is track down a movie called Frank Miller's The Spirit. It came out in 2008. It's a terrible, terrible comic book superhero movie, but Frank Miller does a commentary track on the film in which he goes into such detail about it's an important reminder that even the worst movie you can think of has a a gajillion intentional, willful, artistic choices behind every shot. And doesn't mean you have to like the movie, but and this sort of goes to what I feel I see in a lot of the online discourse is that very little in a movie happens by accident, especially in terms of what makes it to the screen. So if you're wondering, did they do that intentionally? The answer is probably yes. But anyway, I apologize. Mr. Manny, any thoughts on critic versus consumer?
I think now the lines are getting blurred, right, between critic and consumer. I think every consumer is a critic in their own right. There's definitely more of the analysis that comes in. I mean, I do think that, I mean, I'm throwing around the word critic loosely. Anybody who has access to Reddit or one of those sites is technically, a critic in their own right. But the sort of, if I want to say, science of film criticism as opposed to the art of filmmaking, really comes from a place of, like they were saying, first of all, gratitude for the production team and all of that. Like, guys, you put together, I mean, a kick butt film, a kick butt series that is, I mean, even if whether it makes waves or not, it's made some level of a screen, whether it's Netflix or if it's the, celluloid or whatever it is. Um, it's done well or even mediocre, but you've made it. You've done it. So kudos for that. And then we can kind of proceed from there and say, okay, let's dissect these different choices. Something that my film teacher said to me in my freshman year, which I've kind of been mulling over as I've gone through my time with Kids First, is that if you become a filmmaker, if you become a film critic, films are either 100% ruined or 100% enhanced for you, right? Like you can't help but see the flaws in every shot, but at the same time, you come to this realization that, man, this is really a beautiful form of expression. And there's really so much possibility here to, I mean, express yourself in all kinds of ways, to put out all kinds of messages. There's a serious form of power really in filmmaking. And you as a film critic are able to sort of put out your own message about these films that are going to be making waves, or at least having somewhat of a presence in the public sphere.
Fair enough. I'm trying to think of how I can ask this without being an obnoxious leading question, but okay, I'll just ask a very open question. A lot of the discourse in terms of film criticism, especially in terms of the younger generations, is how they feel about on-screen intimacy or implied intimacy and or the on-screen depictions of negative behavior. And with the caveat that you and yours have grown up in, frankly, a terrible time. Sorry. I don't envy that. I certainly would understand if you don't. My feeling is always that there's always been an issue with empathetic films made by empathetic filmmakers that are consumed by unempathetic audiences. And that basically means good people making films that are meant to be morally just, that are still interpreted by the masses in the worst possible way you can imagine. Is that something that I'm not going to put you on a spot to ask what your opinions are on that, but is that the kind of is that a discourse that you see amongst your peers in terms of, depiction equals endorsement, they prefer action to intimacy? Does that make any sense? Because I'm trying to, this one I should have
Yeah,
written down.
so I agree with that. I mean, like, this all goes back to our generation. Like, we get bored really, really easily. So I feel like there has been the film industry is like, oh, we need to have more action. We need to get more involved because everyone is counting on us because they're they really need this and we need to give it to them. That's kind of how I feel they view it because people are just asking and asking for more and more and really quickly, and they're getting tired of the movie or whatever, and they just need a lot of action. And sometimes, well, for sometimes it's too much and sometimes it's not enough. So I feel like for some people, it's hard to find a balance for them and it's hard to recognize the balance. So for sure, I feel like a lot of people are rushing the film industry in some ways, and we're not getting as much of a potential as we could.
Fair enough. Does anyone have any more questions for me?
How did you hear about Kids First?
I like it. I think anything that encourages, movie going and I don't want to say fandom because you don't have to be a fan of everything you see, but again, it feels like theatrical cinema is declining bit by bit on the cultural totem pole, just by virtue of the amount of choices that everyone has, the pivot to streaming, and then frankly, there was a period from like 2019 to 2022 where Wall Street was basically forcing every studio to say, be like Netflix. And then when that turned out to be a terrible idea, they're like, why are you losing money? You should be cutting costs and making profits. And that's my own, it's I watched that happen in slow motion, and it was like, if you've seen Die Hard 2, there's a scene where John McClane is trying to stop a plane from crashing, and he's in the snow with these fire torches saying, don't land, you don't have enough landing room. And I swear that was me from like 2019 to 2022. Because for those who didn't follow or don't remember, basically Wall Street was telling all of these companies the way to say that you are successful or serious about the future is to spend ungodly amounts of money on streaming shows and films. Didn't matter if anyone was going to watch this stuff. Didn't matter if it actually, the idea that it would boost subscriber numbers, and then on a monthly level, you'd be making ungodly amounts of money. And that would not only replace the money for cable, because linear TV is declining, as you know, it would replace like everything else, including box office, DVD rentals, VOD, TV licensing, and all that jazz. And shocker, wasn't true. And in early 2022, Wall Street very summarily changed its mind, saying, "Yeah, we want revenue and profits now." And that's frankly a lot of why the industry is the way it is, because now they're trying to crawl themselves out of a hole that was not that they didn't necessarily get into by choice. And that's a long way of me saying that I have watched theatrical movie going decline as a cultural temple, as a cultural top of the hill for as long as I've been doing this, frankly. And I don't, I understand when taking a family to a five to a movie with concessions, and try telling your kids they can't get popcorn and soda because it's too expensive. That's running you $150 versus waiting a month, if not a lot less, to watch that movie on your HD television for 20 to 30 bucks. I get it. I don't begrudge. I think the theaters should be doing more with studios to bring costs down for the overall experience, but until they do that, I understand. So what do I think about Kids First? I think it's terrific because it creates a furthering of film criticism and film study and film examination as an art form, and where applicable as a money-making venture beyond just people my age that are dying out and retiring. And it is, it's nice to know that I'm not the last of my kind. And I really think part of that's on Hollywood. Again, they spent the last 10 years serving us these big blockbuster movies that were like, this franchise that your grandfather loved. Here's another one. What? You don't care as much as they did? Oh no, we're bankrupt now. And so I think Hollywood really needs to meet young people where they are. And that might just be something as simple as, instead of making the 8th Scooby-Doo movie, find something that they've never heard of, that maybe their kids discovered on Wattpad or Webtoon or various other platforms that I shouldn't know about, but I do because it's my job, and make that the next franchise. Anyway. Oh, here's the fun part. Is there, and again, I'm not asking to be annoying. Is there anything that you've heard me say that you disagree on?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the one thing I'll add, if I can
Sure.
take it like a mile further, maybe. What I think, I mean, and thanks to Miss Rainey and thanks to Kids First for this. I mean, beyond the platform given to kids, to share their opinions, it's also that we as an organization don't just prioritize big studio films. There's independent films. I mean, I reviewed Minari, which isn't really a small budget film. It's A24 as well. But it was a foreign film, which maybe wasn't as much of a theater film and more of critic liked film, and it did really well for itself. But I've also reviewed things that were submitted. For example, like Latvia's submission to the Oscars 2 years ago. This year, I reviewed Germany's submission to the Oscars. So I've kind of become the sort of international film critic kid at Kids First, if it wasn't obvious in my constant aberrations about Bollywood. But what I like is, again, we're looking at film on a global level. We're looking at film on a cultural level, and we're not just saying what's playing in your local theater. Here's my star rating. Here's how I'm going to evaluate it on like 5 parameters. What we're saying instead is here's tons of different films, tons of different TV shows. We even do podcasts, all these kind of different media. Here are the ways you can get them. So we're actually encouraging a diversification of consumption of media, even though we all love movie theaters and we love the traditional way of viewing entertainment. And we're giving our own fresh perspectives on that and encouraging consumption of things that are even away from the mainstream. I mean, an Icelandic film that might show up on Prime Video in 2 months, something like that even. And I think that's really special.
And you know what? You're right. I have overemphasized mainstream cinema in this conversation. So you're right.
No, it's
I
totally
was wrong.
fine.
I absolutely should have been more about art house cinema and other stuff of that nature.
No, absolutely. We also do a lot of Indian student film stuff, which is another, I think, hallmark of our sort of kid-centric like the focus of the organization. We have our own film festival. We review those films, and it's really really by kids for kids. You'll see an 18-year-old student filmmaker putting something together, and a 15-year-old is reviewing it and saying, "Okay, cool, we can screen this in one of our dozen partner locations, which are now in Pakistan, across the US, in Ukraine, all over the place." So it's really special. That's all I wanted to say.
It must be really fun to review a student short film that is just so terrible that you just have to look at the camera and go, give up on your dreams. It's not going to happen for you.
It's very rare that we actually find those. I'll be honest. I'll say, I mean, Hanadi and Sydney, you can chime in on this if you all have seen a couple of the films submitted on Film Freeway and stuff for our festival. But I think we've been very fortunate, at least for me, I've been very fortunate that all the things I reviewed really, I mean, I can't really say I've ever reviewed a terrible festival entry, honestly. They've all been pretty remarkable, especially given the demographic who's making it, given the resources they're making it with, given the backgrounds they have. It's generally pretty fun and a good experience.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and they're all really unique, and most of them have a really important message. And that's so cool that people of that young age have that view that some adults don't even have. Like they see something that some people don't see, and they're spreading that great message out to people. And it's really impressive, and it's really fun to review.
Yeah, definitely. I've reviewed lots of good student films. Like I don't think I've ever seen one that made me like, no, I can't watch this ever again. Like, most of them have kept me pretty entertained while I watch them, and it hasn't been very hard to like submit a review on it.
Fair enough. It's interesting that you mentioned about viewpoints that even adults don't think about, because that's something that the industry overall I think is struggling with. We've seen several examples of younger, not a white guy actors and actresses that get in trouble for arguing opinions that aren't quite in line with baby boomer politics. And it's like, if you want these new fresh faces, you're going to have to understand that their politics don't necessarily align with post-Cold War Americana here. And in their lived experience, if I may use an obvious example, they are young enough to have never grown up when Israel wasn't being run by people like Netanyahu. And yeah, their frame of reference is a little different. And frankly, as a cranky old Jew, I agree with them. That's a different conversation. So yes, I am looking forward to seeing Abigail this weekend. Speaking of which, do you like horror movies? Because that seems to be one of the really safe theatrical genres these days.
That's the one genre I don't watch.
Fair enough.
The one genre I can't watch.
Just because you don't like being scared.
I guess. I mean,
no, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, my friends have tried to get me into it, but I don't know. There's just maybe I've just not found the right film to get me kind of jump started on the horror genre.
No, no, if you don't like it, you don't like it. I mean, if you don't like getting your, if you don't like having that sick to your stomach feeling, you don't ride a roller coaster. That's fine. Um, do either of you like horror films?
I love
Yeah.
horror films.
Any favorites?
Yeah. Go ahead.
One of my favorite like horror movies probably have
Sure.
to be like the first Conjuring.
Ooh,
I'm
my
taking
favorite
notes.
of that one is
I need to watch
Conjuring.
this.
Annabelle Comes Home is my favorite of that one, just because I like the I like the funhouse, weirdly theme park mentality of it, all the random stuff bouncing around the house. And I thought the coda was very moving. It reminds me that, however fictionalized it may be, the on-screen depictions of the Warrens is very loving and weirdly wholesome. And yes, I know it's not true. What? You mean the real life Ghostbusters might not have been on the up and up? No. Anyway, sorry. That's another discourse that annoys me. It's like, I bet you didn't know the Warrens were actually terrible people. It's like, yeah, I did. You know how? Because they could sell themselves as professional Ghostbusters. That was my first clue. Anyway, Sydney, any thoughts on the horror genre?
I like horror movies. Sometimes I do get scared though. I can't lie. One of my favorites is the original Scream. I like that one. It kind of
Uh,
got me interested in that.
okay, I have a question that's going to be a very high test of your moral character. What do you think
Okay.
of Scream 4?
Honestly, after Scream 2, I kind of got bored with it.
That test you passed. Not everyone does. I saw the movie when it first came out in theaters and thought, this is terrible. I love Wes Craven, but it's like, it felt like a bunch of old men trying to write how teenagers sound. And then,
I
like,
know.
year after year, they're like this weird fan base. I'm guessing they were young enough that they saw it when they were teenagers and whatever, but it's like, there's this insane, I would argue, nutty Scream 4 is good, actually, discourse. I'm like, I was there. It was terrible. Nobody liked it then. We were right. Sometimes we're right the first time. Not
Hmm.
everything's a Jennifer's body. Um, but anyway, um, let's see. I mean, I can talk for as long as until you and yours get bored of me. So I'm not sure if you are on a clock on my account. What are you looking forward to coming in the next few months? Movies small or large, to the extent that you're not looking forward to anything?
Oh, wait.
Oh, I apologize. What movies are you looking forward to in the near future?
I think the Kingdom of the Planet of Apes, because I want to see what they do with it. I want to see how it turns out. Um, and hopefully it's good.
No, that franchise is a high quality.
Hmm.
They're all good, more or
Yeah,
less.
yeah,
And I like that filmmaker. He did the Maze Runner series, which I thought was
hmm
very well directed, and it looks great. I mean, they're trying to sell it as a quasi Avatar, and why not?
hmm
Um, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. Mr.
Um,
Manny,
I think probably, I mean, this is gonna be a really trite answer, but the Deadpool and Wolverine.
fair.
That's the one franchise that like I can't get enough of. I love it. It's perfectly irreverent. I think they get the tone right. So looking forward to that. Also, Kingdom of Planet of the Apes. And I have yet to watch a couple of films that released recently, so I'm probably gonna catch up on those too.
Miss Keys, and I think I've been told we need to wrap it up. Alas.
um, a film that I'm looking forward to is the third animated Spider-Man one.
Oh yeah.
Oh my
Oh
gosh,
yeah.
how did I forget
Well,
that?
that's not
Yeah.
till next summer. It was supposed to come out this summer. They got
I know
delayed for whatever reason.
Yeah, yeah,
it was
yeah.
supposed to come out March 29th, and then they delayed it.
Yes. So instead, we got to watch King Kong and Godzilla
Hmm.
team up and become friends. Well, I don't know if they're friends. They kind of work together brief. I don't know.
The colleagues,
Yes,
acquaintances.
exactly. They're work
They're
buddies.
frenemies.
Yes. Um, but yeah, I did those two films. I mean, the first two I think are spectacular American animated pictures, and I think they're good examples of how, whatever you feel about the comic books genres or whatever, there's gold in them hills. Doesn't mean you have to. And even Deadpool, that is an example of doing something different and interesting within a known genre. And there are plenty of people that oh, I'm done with Marvel, but they still want to see the Guardians movies because they like the Guardians movies. Or they went to see Wakanda Forever because they like the Black Panther franchise specifically. The same thing with Deadpool and or Wolverine. So yeah, that's I've seen Fall Guy, which I like quite a bit. Obviously, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, yes. Deadpool, Wolverine, yes. It's kind of slim pickings this summer, unfortunately, especially in terms of
I
big
know.
films. A lot of that's because of stuff got delayed because of the strike. A lot of that's because, and this is an existential problem for the industry, a lot of the biggest franchises kind of came to their natural end right at the end of the decade or soon after. Star Wars was finished. The Avengers was finished. We had our second Frozen movie. We were gonna have our second Wonder Woman, and all of these things are mostly done. So now it's like, at least in terms of tentpole franchises, where does Hollywood go from here? And unfortunately, because we keep having extinction level events, whether it's a pandemic or a dual strike or a push to streaming, Hollywood hasn't, I would argue, had the time to sort of figure out, okay, what do we do now? So unfortunately, they're still sort of throwing out what theoretically worked in the 2010s, but we'll see. Anyway, I've been told I have to let you go. I apologize. Much as I'd love to keep you all day, they won't let me. I hope I have not been too annoying and obnoxious. All three of you, have been an absolute pleasure. And other than that, if you have any of you have any closing thoughts, either about the organization, about cinema, or just the world as it exists, and if the answer is no, that's fine. I just want to try to give you and yours the last word.
I honestly really like this discussion, and thank you for speaking with us. We've had a lot of different viewpoints on this, so I've honestly learned a lot about filmmaking, and I'm happy we got to talk about it because we're all really interested in it.
I appreciate that. The pleasure is at least half mine.
Yeah,
And
thank
you
you.
think Scream 4 stinks, so you're cool. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh yeah, you're very welcome. This was an absolute pleasure. And again, I mean, beyond promoting your organization, and that's obviously a value, I don't get to talk to young people about the movies all that much. So I'm sort of in this weird bubble where it's like, I know that online is a bubble, that online interest or online fandom doesn't translate into general audience interest. If it did, then Monkey Man would have made $100 million, alas. And Immaculate would have made more than the first Omen, but whatever. That's not how the world works, unfortunately. But beyond that, it's very hard for me to get a bead on what younger people, those interested in the industry, and just civilians, as I like to call them, what do they think? And this has been very educational for me. So I mean, it's all the times I thought I was teaching you, but you were teaching me. Okay, I'm gonna go on that one. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day. And if it is allowed, approved of, and or whatever, I would love to speak to you again. But that is not my call. And if you're secretly hoping, dear God, I hope to never talk to this person again, that is totally fine. I'll never know about it. Take care. Have a great night.
You
Thank
too.
you. You as
Bye,
well.
thank you.
Bye.
You're very welcome.